So thank you. We've got 55 minutes left, so I'll make sure as much as possible the best use of our time to get through this topic. So as I mentioned, even for those that aren't necessarily governed by the Queensland legislation, there are some parallels and some opportunities for learning here and application, which certainly can help your own critical risk management journey. So if you've been on my webinars before, standard structure at the start. So turn off any distractions. If you're going to take notes, take some notes, flip your phone over, whatever you can, because I'm going to go hard and there's going to be some heavy content. I'm going to go quickly. So give yourself the best chance you can to get into it. So first question, hopefully this isn't hard, but interested in inputs and feedbacks. So what are the pain points right now with critical controls and getting them right? Just throw something in the chat. Really interested to hear. So independent of whatever the legislation's telling us to do or inviting us to do, in theory, it's a program that can help save lives. And right now, I'm sure there are some challenges for getting, even putting aside compliant legislation. So what are some people seeing here is what aren't we nailing? Joel, exposure to a material risk. Christy, busy work on verifying non-critical controls. Well, that's a really good one. Thanks, Christy. Potential fatality. Yes. What else? What's the impact? Oh, okay, we're getting that. All right, letting that one in. All right, so we know we're in the right game here. So if I think about now, I'm not trying to be distracted. I'm still letting some people in. So we think about critical control management. We think about legislation. So there's already been some help guides out there and some, the International Council of Mining Metals is an invitation. There's some frameworks and the industry groups are helping move forwards. And right now we're struggling to do it and get it right. And how do we know that? Because we're continuing to have repeat events where we're having the same types of challenges with the same types of hazards that have been around forever. Then if we overlay now with legislation, so thinking about the Queensland mining legislation, there's some parameters here which are going to set a framework that people will be measured against and that will be regulated. And so what do we think the problem is there? There's some businesses that maybe look all good and maybe tick because they have done critical risk management really well, and it's a simple mapping activity from the legislative requirements into what they've already got. And there'll be people at the other end of the scale who don't have critical control management or got the infancy, and there'll be people along that continuum. There might be some people that've got a program in place, but now they're not sure about the legislative requirements, and then how do they comply with that? So that's the problems we're seeing, and I'm guessing for a number of you, that's why you're here. Some people said keen to learn more. And what I promise we'll go through today is you'll leave here at least knowing what are the requirements and what is at least some options on how you might go about meeting those requirements. So a few of you I know on the line already. Hello again. For those that don't, so my name's Christian Young. Been in mining safety now almost for 25 years. Impress Solutions I started 5 years ago, and our whole mission is about helping you save lives at work. And I've certainly for the last 5 years have been doubling down on critical risk management, fatality prevention, and here's some of the clients that I've been working with and we've been supporting. We also do other stuff, safety health management systems and labour hire, but this is the pointy end of town and this is what we want to focus on today. So the style, certainly I'm going to move fast. I'll use probably critical control management or CCM as opposed to critical control management. The push-ups signal is there as I'm working on not using the word in my filler. And so part of the reason why I'm recording is one, to use as a resource that you guys can come back and look at, but two, my daughter has a look and I have to give her 5 push-ups every time I do the and I'm going to move quick through it because I want to get through so we've got plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And also really keen on your feedback and sharing. So there'll be a number of points throughout where I'll ask for your input. And there's also, when we go through it as well, there'll be some time for some some self-assessments where you rate how your business is in relation to that element on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 if we want to use that one. So the structure, going to cover off these fundamentals. We're going to go through what are each of the elements, what does it look like in terms of how you might meet it, and then have a time for some Q&A at the end. And obviously a 40-minute conversation isn't going to give you everything possible that I could do in the time that we've got. So at the end, I'll talk about what you can do to get some more information as well. Okay, and I'm just checking there's no one in the waiting room, so let's keep going. And at the end, I'll talk about how you can get a copy of the slides and the recording as well. Okay, so first of all, we're going to just reflect on what are these changes, or where did these changes come from? And if for some of you followed me on LinkedIn, you might have seen me put up some of this stuff. So essentially there was I don't know if you call it an omnibus bill, but a large bill put forward in 2024, the Resources, Safety and Health Amendment Legislation Bill, where there was a number of proposed changes and improvements provided or suggested in there. And you can read here, which I'm not going to read as well, what's the objective, where did these come from? So you can see a lot of stuff from the Brady report, the Grosvenor inquiry, the Queensland Coal Mining Board of Inquiry, to use the right term, the stuff out of the safety resets. And we can see here the legislation that is impacted by these changes. So we're thinking certainly in the banner of Queensland, we can see here that we've got coal mining and mining and quarrying. So metalliferous quarries, obviously if you're in a supporting organisation, so you're a supplier or a manufacturer, and then we also see some interesting touch points on petroleum and gas. And there's a bit here around the intent of that. And there was a number of pillars or categories to these changes. Interestingly, they've used a term, or there's an intent here around HRO, which I won't unpack today. I could probably talk for a while about that one. And so we had some elements around that, which you can see there's some sub-elements that are around start meeting summary. Yep, someone's asked for that. That's cool. Something about regulatory enforcement and some pieces here around contemporary legislation. So what we're only talking about today, or I'm only going to focus on, is the elements around critical control management. So it's very important for you to be clear that I'm not covering everything that's in the Resources, Safety and Health Amendment Bill. I'm only going to focus on this bit around critical control management. So I encourage you to check out, or whoever within your business, hopefully they're across some of these other aspects. Or if people are really interested, maybe I can unpack some of these other ones. So what's some timing here? So some people might have seen some timelines being about. So passed on 12th of June, and then come the 1st of June 2025, there's essentially a 12-month window for compliance, for getting yourself ready to comply to these requirements. And then by June 2026, then essentially it's in force, and you should be able to tick all of these requirements. So there is maybe don't panic yet, but I think it's good practice what it's pointing towards, and I'd certainly be recommending, if you're not on the journey, then do that. Now, recently I've seen some information, now take this with a grain of salt, I'm not sure if it's been formally publicised everywhere, where if you're in underground mining by September, then there's some requirements here around having critical controls inside your principal hazard management plans. And if in your open cut mines, this is coal, so the 4 mandatory principal hazard management plans. So later in the content, I'll talk about how you might be able to do that, but that's some interesting dates I've seen. And then we can see here there's a date banded about there. So not sure if that's new to people or people have already seen that. It's just something I saw yesterday around the timings. Okay, and as we go through, if people have a question, feel free to dump it in there. So we talked about where it's come from. We've talked about a bit of a timeline. Let's now dive into what the requirements are. So I'm not going to talk about the objective. You can look at this in the slide pack. So in relation to the Queensland coal mining, there's a number of elements. And again, I'm going to go through this shortly. And I've summarized them here on this slide. So it's a bit about the risk management system and an update. There's a bit about updating safety and health management system. If you have principal hazard management plans, then there's a bit about updating them as well. So that's coal-centric, and then talking about some obligations of officers of corporations. And then there's some definitions which are being introduced around a critical control and a material unwanted event. And then this bit here around timelines, which I've already mentioned. Okay, and then similarly, very, very similar, although I had to use some different wording. If you're in mining and quarrying, it's those same elements are being talked about: updating the risk management system, updating the safety and health management system, some obligations of officers of corporations, definition of a critical control, and a material unwanted event. And what is different is that there isn't PHMPs or principal hazard management plans called out specifically because that's not in that particular legislation. Okay, so now we're going to jump into it. So that's the overview of the changes. So let's start thinking now, and we'll start at the definitions. So we can see here, you can read it. I'm not going to unpack it. The term is material unwanted event. So I've been using the term critical risk management. I know some businesses have material risk, primary unwanted events, I think is what Anglo calls it. People might call it other things. So in the particular legislation, the term is material unwanted event. And interestingly here, which is what I'll talk about shortly, there is no specified binary criteria on what is a material unwanted event. Each business needs to work out what their threshold is. Okay, so that's very, very important. So it's not saying, what do you call it? A principal hazard is material unwanted event, although it will be because it's multiple fatality. It's not saying a single fatality event is going to be a material unwanted event. It's saying to each organization, you define your threshold. That then determines what will be material and therefore material unwanted event for you. Okay, so just quickly a little bit of content here. So what does it mean, or what's an opportunity here? So we've talked about the legislation now uses material unwanted event. So what's your organization currently call it? So it's an opportunity to go and look at that. Does it align? Does yours meet the minimum criteria of whatever the definition is? Does it need to be a tweak? So that's what I'm talking about here. The definition as well should reference about the threshold, and I'll talk about how we might do threshold assessments shortly, and ensure that we have this definition should be documented within your safety and health management system somewhere. So it could be, do you have it in your risk management procedures where that might be where that definition lives? Or is there a glossary of terms or somewhere else that your organization might have? So a quick round the grounds, and this is the first self-assessment rating. Just choose a number between 1 and 10. If you just look at that now, where does your organization sit in relation to this requirement? Have you got it nailed already? Like your definition of your risk is has a threshold and it's very similar to what's been talked about, or you even use the same term? Or is there some work to be done there around aligning the definitions, considering thresholds, and maybe even what the name of the thing is? So just jump in the chat. Where are you sitting at the moment? Joel's a 9, Caitlin's an 8, Chrissy's a 3, Grant's a 4. Yep. Heaps of other people throw in there. Dennis a 5, Walters 5 to 6 out of 10. Yes, Kerry, KT, you're a 5. Who else? All right, Abby's 3 and 4. Rotos, you guys are an 8. Lyndon's a 7. Okay. Yep. Keep jumping in there. Feel free, everyone else, because really keen to see where people are at. And while you're doing that, I'll keep moving on. So we mentioned about threshold. and working out what is a threshold. So what might be a way in which you could go about a threshold-based calculation? And this is what we talk about in our two-day masterclass. So I really like this terminology coming in. And this is, in my view, is one of the foundations of critical risk management anyway, in its entirety. So a way in which you could go about this, I'm not saying the way, just a way, is if you think about your consequence table that you would have within your organization. So on your risk matrix, you'd have a consequence table, which might look something like that, like this, where we have the different pillars, be it health and safety, environment, finance, reputation. You might have 7 things, you might have 3, doesn't really matter. And then at some point you'd have from a negligible level all the way up to whatever the term is for your worst level in relation to that. And what the idea is your organization defines, well, where's my level of materiality for each of these aspects? So for example, this organization said, look, if we have anything that's equal to a 4, so a single fatality or more, that is material for us. And therefore, any of our risks within our business, that could be a single fatality or worse, we will class as material unwanted event. And then we're going to go off and do all these things in relation to material unwanted events. Similarly, in terms of environment, it might be a different threshold where this organization said level 3. So it's like, okay, anything that could potentially result in a level 3 or worse, then we're classing that as material unwanted event. Now, if we look through, my interpretation is legislation's very health and safety centric. Yeah, correct. So is it actual or potential? I think it's either way because it's consequence based. So if you actually had one of these, I mean, that'd be pretty bad for you. So that's it. It's consequence based. And they're the things that we don't want to happen. I might come back to it a little bit later, Margot, because it's a good question. So one of the parts when you're defining materiality criteria is, well, what pillars are in scope? So for example, most businesses, they don't put finance consequences in this same banner when they're thinking about critical risks. Same with legal and compliance. Some put environment and health and safety together because like, well, let's just treat them the same way. Some separate it out. So that's part of defining the materiality, is working out, well, which dimensions or pillars are part there. And obviously you then want to set what's your red line for these things. And then above that, we're going to do some stuff about. Below that, it's not saying it's not important, but you already have other things in place that you're doing with that and managing this. We're just not going to apply the critical control management framework to that. So some words here. So once you've identified your threshold, then that would need to be defined somewhere within your probably your risk management procedure when we talk about our definition or how we calculate material unwanted events. And here's some example of wording that could be there. You know, risk is classed as material if its potential consequence is equal to or exceeds the following. It might be actual and potential consequence. And then we've just called out what pillars are in and equal to or exceeding level 4 or level 3. So around the grounds, how does, no, I've already asked this, I won't do that because we already talked about thinking about materiality criteria. So if you've got a question that pops into your mind, throw it in the chat and we can jump to that later on. So that's now, we've talked about the definition of material unwanted event. We talked about the importance of a threshold, and then it's pretty much up to the organization to define. So quick yes, no. What's your answer to this? Does this mean that potential single fatality consequence events will be classed as material unwanted events by the legislation? What do people think? I encourage you to have a bit of a think about it. So does the legislation tell us that single fatality consequences need to have critical controls? KT, you've hit it. Yes, depends on criteria. Christy, only if we find this as our threshold for our MUE. Joel, yep, correct. Linda, no. So that's just an important distinction. The legislation isn't mandating although if it says it's got principal hazard, I would say so, and we've seen that. But let's say at single fatality level, if your organisation sets the threshold there, then cool, you can. Some organisations might set their threshold at, you know, multiple fatality, and therefore that doesn't need all the critical controls and things like that. So that's an important distinction there, because we've been so used to talking about, you know, principal hazards and single fatalities, and then we have this term material unwanted events, and then we're thinking about thresholds. Okay, so what have we got here? Once you've identified your threshold, you need a mechanism to formally identify which risks meet or exceed your materiality threshold. So if we said now, okay, here's our threshold, and we've defined it, how do we then go and apply our threshold to all of our risks? What's a mechanism we could use for that? Because we need some type of process. Can't just be someone sits in an office and says, well, that one's material, that one's not, that one's material, that one's not. What's a process we can use for that? Yeah, Karen, broad brush risk assessment developer. Yep, you can use risk assessment, baseline risk assessment. Yep, Joel. Exactly. So your organizations may have these. Again, I don't know everyone on the line. So broad brush risk assessment or baseline risk assessment. So some words here. However, what it is you sit back, look at your whole site or look at your organization, depending on the scope, where we say, well, what are the risks which are material for us? What are the ones that meet or exceed our red line? And again, following the risk assessment principles, cross-section of people, generally it's managers who all agree and endorse that these are our material risks. Okay, so if you don't have that at the moment and you're going to setting a threshold, then my suggestion is that you start using a broad brush risk assessment process that then that's your evidence of how you applied the threshold to come up with these are our critical risks. So rating of 1 to 10, where do people sit in relation to broad brush risk assessments? Let's go around the ground. Jump in the chat. I guess 0, you don't have anything and far away from it. 10, you've got them there. Or somewhere in between, you've kind of got them, but probably needs a bit of a birthday. What have people got at the moment? All right, so we can see some 9s and 10s. We've got some 5s, 6 that are done but not understood. Okay, so it looks like people have got some stuff. All right, so that's good. Then potentially that journey isn't as far away for you there. Thank you for those who shared, all of those people that jumped into the chat. All right, so now if we think about critical controls. So there's now a definition of a critical control, which again, if you're familiar with the International Council on Mining Metals, the ICMM critical control management guides, you can see the language there is very similar. So if you've been using that previously, then potentially not too far away. So same again, you know, look at the definition that you currently have. If you have a critical control, do you have a definition? If you do, consider, does yours at least meet that as minimum criteria? You might have some extra stuff on stop. If you don't have that term, then potentially the easiest way is just accept that as your definition, then you've got good alignment. So where do people sit 1 to 10 in terms of definition of control and how it might align to some of the language here? Just quick round the grounds. What do people think? Got to look there. So we got some 9s and 9s. Margie, you got a 4. Karen's a 10. That's awesome. Chris, you got a 6. What else? Some other people got there in that space. Linda's an 8. 5. 8. Grant's an 8. Craig's an 8. Who else? Anyone else want to throw in there? Dennis is an 8 as well. Okay. All right. So now, same check question. Does this mean that potential single fatality consequence events will have, is the legislation saying that single fatality consequence events need to have critical controls? Yes, no. Brent's gone first. No. Craig's gone a no. No, no. All right. So I think we've now got it. Yeah, because we've worked out what's my threshold will determine what have critical controls. Joel, if defined as a material unwanted event. Perfect. Thank you. So we're understanding there is association there with it. All right. Which then leads us into, well, if we potentially need to have critical controls, then what's our process for determining what is a critical control or not? Does anyone want to throw in a chat, what are some parts in the process to getting to a point where we say, well, these are our critical controls? What's an activity or some activities that, in theory, we would need to do? So, Abby, you've got the critical control decision tree. Rodo, sorry to drop off. No worries, Rodo. Good to see you anyway, mate. Linda, ICMM decision tree. Yep. Have a decision-making tool. Correct. From Hattie. Yep. Devoto uses the ICMM guideline. What about prior to the decision-making tool? Thank you, Abby. Bowtie. Assess causal pathways, identifies high-level controller can prevent or mitigate the events, design the control implementation. Joel, very good. Consultation, absolutely. Thanks, Karen, as well. So, about a bow tie. So if I take a step back, we might have, currently we've got lots of controls wandering around. Yep. And we need to get to the point where we say, well, these few are critical and these are not. And fortunately, and unfortunately, depending which way you look at it, we just can't go out there today and say, well, these controls are critical and these ones aren't. We won't say have to. What good looks like is to follow the structured process to get to that point of here are our critical controls. And essentially, it's, well, at least a two-part process where for each material unwanted event, we do a risk assessment. So a lot of people do bow ties. There are other tools you can use where we take the risk, we understand causes and consequences and preventive and mitigated controls, which allows us for each risk to say, well, here's my library of controls for this one. And then from that, and this is what people were calling out, is we then apply some type of evaluation process to look at those. Let's say there might be 50 controls there. Apply an evaluation process to objectively get to a point, or more objectively get to a point of these ones are critical. And so that's why I'm suggesting there's globally a two-part process. So for those that haven't seen bow ties before, very, very simple representation here, where we've got our unwanted event, let's say a loss of control of vehicle. We've got causes that could lead to a loss of control of vehicle. We've got potential consequences from a loss of control of vehicle. And these controls here are designed to prevent this cause leading to this. And these controls here are designed to mitigate how bad the consequence could be. And then if we think about, I think it's this one, if we think about then the critical control processes, once we've gone through that and identified what are all of my controls, then we apply some rules to work out, well, which one out of these might be critical. So for example, here, again, training example, this organization might say that autonomous braking is one of my critical controls for my material unwanted event of a loss of control of a vehicle. Then in terms of the selection process, a few people have called out the International Council on Mining and Metals selection process, or ICMM for short, which I think everyone's familiar with. We also have a selection process as well, which the back end mirrors the ICMM, and the front end just ensures that some of the simple checks for what is a control are met first before we consider this thing for, is it eligible for critical control selection? So there's a bit of work, and I think someone asked me a question about this as part of the pre-webinar content share. There's an interesting model out there to work out, well, is a control a support activity or verification activity, or a control, or not one of those? I won't unpack that one there. You wouldn't be surprised at how many critical controls I see that don't even meet these first two tests. And so that's an opportunity, obviously, if you haven't gone down that pathway. Another one here that we like to include is around, have we done an effectiveness assessment of the control? If we have we also set as an organisation what might be a threshold of effectiveness for consideration as a critical control? And what that's helping us do is just not saying, well, just because it's this doesn't mean, well, we're going to class it as critical control. How effective is this control? Does that make sense that we'd even want to class it as being critical if it's not effective in the first place? So some extra slants that we put in there. So round the grounds, rating out of 1 to 10, how does your organisation go in relation to getting to this point of selecting the critical controls and applying these processes and activities? Joel's got a 9, Grant's an 8, Caitlin's a 4 on the journey now. Yes, familiar with that. Who else? Linda's a 6, needs work. Yep. Who else has got some stuff? Dennis is an 8, Devolta 4, very little understanding in the business. Yep. Chris is a 1, that's nice, honest. Margot's a 4, understanding it needs to be implemented. Yep. Abby on the journey with Caitlin. Okay, nice. You guys are teaming up. Craig reintroducing to the business. Yep, hopefully the business is ready and raring to go on that, Craig. Okay, keeping an eye on time here because I am really, hopefully you're not seeing as waffling, but I am probably taking longer than what I want to. These should be a little bit easier. So if we think now, there's some elements here which talks about add critical controls to what critical risk management elements and practices and systems that a coal mine must incorporate to achieve an acceptable level of risk. So the language is very similar, and that's pretty big if you think about it. Adding critical controls to risk management elements, gee, that could be anything and everything if we've got lots of things that help us achieve an acceptable level of risk. So at my first pass, very wordy, I'm not going to read all of this. You can read this in your later on. I'd be hoping you have a risk management procedure. And if you do, then it's going to get a bit of a birthday and an update. We've talked about some definitions. So definition of critical control, definition of material unwanted events. And then also, what's the processes that you apply, like we talked about? Well, how do we identify a material unwanted event? What's our threshold? How are they managed over time to achieve an acceptable level of risk? Same with critical controls. How are we identifying them? What's our process? How are they managed, monitored, improved to achieve an acceptable level of risk? And even just in terms of managed, monitored, and improved, there's a fair bit that sits behind it. So just be ready for that, and I probably can't unpack that too much here. Then if we're thinking about risk management elements, there's a lot of other artifacts, isn't there, and supporting processes that support and enable risk to be reduced to an acceptable level. So I'd be thinking about those other tools that we have within our business. So for example, does our JSA template and process support our critical control management process? Does our standard RAC process do that? What are we doing at SLAM Take 5 level? Are we doing anything? Then we see our safety and health management system, which I'll talk about soon. Then we've got all the other different systems that support it, don't we? Our VFLs, workplace inspections, statutory inspections, internal audit, incident reporting, change management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots. So rating of 1 to 10, or rating out of 10. If you look at this suite and potentially what the legislation's inviting us to update and to make sure critical controls are enshrined or integrated to, where do you sit on this continuum? There's lots of things here, but gut feel out of 10, where are you now? Or where's your organisation, not you? Got 5, Grant's a 4, Guy's an 8. Oh, that's good. Margot, you're a 3. Grant OD's a 7, Chrissy's a 3, Caitlin's a 6, Linda update required in most documents 3. Yep, 100%. Joel's an 8. Gee, you guys looking pretty good, Joel. Who else? Anyone else got stuff in there? Melanie's a 3. Yep. More to be done. And, and you guys are at least aware of what's coming. So you're probably ahead of some of the others. So critical controls in the safety and health management system. So same type of Lisa basis number, not all yet. Same type of idea. So we've got critical controls, and then how are they as a measure to ensure that the SHMS is adequate and effective achieving several level of risk? So I won't ask this question because we just don't have times. So my interpretation here is we're starting to think about critical controls, safety and health management systems. How are they ingrained, embedded, integrated within? So from a pure compliance perspective, if you just want to show, yep, tick-ish, then if we've talked about the definition and how we manage them, monitor them, and improve them to achieve an acceptable level of risk, and potentially that's already done in the risk management framework, then potentially that's as on paper as far as you need to do. But obviously that's compliance, but that's not effectiveness. Then we start thinking about the safety and health management system, and normally I have a triangle that shows this, but it didn't have the time to pull it together, is my own personal opinion on what good looks like is there's a one-for-one relationship between one material unwanted event, one bow tie or risk assessment, and one safety and health management system document. So if we have, for example, 40 material risks, then there might be 40 bow ties and 40 management plans or principal hazard management plans, depending on the level and the nature of them. Yes, you can do some combining. So for example, if we have got surface fire and underground fire, there might be one fire management plan. There's a bit of that, but generally that's the ethos I like to take. And where in coal mining, because we have some legislated SOPs, then there'd also have to be some consideration of some mandated SOPs that are part of that risk, or an element of that risk. So for example, for an underground coal mine, if underground fire explosion was a thing, which I think it is in the PHMPs, there's also a mandated requirement to have an SOP for action to be taken in the event of fire. So just some extra elements to be considered as part of that. And then we start thinking about critical controls and how we're documenting them within our management plan or our principal hazard management plan or our SOPs. So there's at least two options. There's probably 5, but I can come up with at least 2. So one is we actually write them in word for word. So we've just done our bow tie. Okay, here's our 5 critical controls. Here's my fire management plan. My 5 critical controls are this, 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 and this. And we've written it in, and then we lock down the document. Cool, happy days. So that's one option. One negative is if we change the critical control, or we want to, tweak it, we want to remove that one and replace it with another one, we know then that we need to go through the whole process of checking it out, doing the review, updating it, and moving it back in. A second option could be, and I've talked to a few people about this, is having a register of critical controls. It could be material unwanted events, critical controls, who owns them, could be in a spreadsheet or a data repository, which is also locked down, and that your safety and health management system documents point to that, reference that. And that one can be updated more and quickly without having to do the full process over here. So there's, at least 2 options, up to you. Do a self-assessment, actually, while we're here, where you sit on either way. Some of the language I am seeing out of RSHQ, certainly around principal hazard management plans, is potentially it's pointing towards this first option here, where actually writing it in within the document. But how have you gone now about putting the critical controls inside your safety and health management system? Doesn't matter which option. Have you got it there? It's not there. Where do people sit on the scale of 1 to 10? Margot's not there. What has some other people got? Thank you, Margot. Hopefully I'm saying your name right. Caitlin, not linked. Dennis is a 9. Oh, that's good, Dennis. Lynn is a 7. Dan's a 3. Immune identified controls and bow tie traffic, but needs to be integrated. Yep. Craig is a 6. Joel's have it all, but not as defined. PHMPs is 8. Doing it now is Grant. Okay. Thank you. So some people on the way. All right, let's keep cracking. So offices of corporations, sorry. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't know too much about this term, and I had to do a little bit of research around what this meant and how I could understand who it was referring to. So we can see a bit of definition here. Very, very similar. It doesn't matter if you're coal mining or metalliferous mining. So these people need to have an understanding of critical controls associated with the operation to ensure corporation processes, yep, blah, 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 blah. So when I looked inside further, so officers, they have some due diligence requirements on behalf of the corporation, and an officer does not include a person appointed as or whose position reports directly or indirectly to the site senior executive for a coal mine. So no one on the management structure, and my follow-on interpretation is no one on a site-based organisational chart. And interestingly, these officers have skin in the game who aren't on this org chart, so potentially could end up in jail if something goes badly wrong. So this is my interpretation then of what that means. So who can share an example of who might be an officer within their organisation, a role? Who can share a role that, based on this, pulling these bits together, they think could be an officer? What's an organisational role? Joel, CCO, yep, that's what I'd be thinking. CEO, CFO, yep, KT. Yeah, anyone at the coal mine operator level. So I'm thinking potentially your corporate, all of your corporate people, if they, potentially could do something different or need to do some due diligence, yep, millions and directors. Anyone could be the financial viability of the business. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so again, it's not a neat thing, but I'm wondering here if there could be some people wandering around that think, hey, I don't work on site, I'm all sweet, that now potentially that's not the case. And maybe they don't know what they don't know. And I would suggest, this is what I'm saying, suggest course of action is start to go down the path of, well, who might they be? And once we identify them, what might be some ways in which we can meet this requirement? So, if it is the CEO or CFO, how do they understand the health of the critical control management process? What should they do? What do they get? So I've had an example here of an idea. I'm not saying it's the way, but if you're already doing monthly health and safety reporting and that goes to everyone, then potentially you could add on some information around critical control management reporting, and it might live in the same report, just as an idea. Caitlin, board of directors, yeah, potentially as well. Certainly the board, yeah, has skin in the game. And if you overlay that with the industrial manslaughter stuff as well, yeah, there's some other people involved. Okay, so I won't do a 1 to 10 on that because I think that's really, really new, and not even myself, I'm still getting my head around that, but that's one that's key. So I haven't pulled out here the specific PHMP one, which is the coal mining centric. I think we covered that off when we talked about safety and health management systems. So a bit of reflection. What's pictured here, and I'm not going to unpack it, is an end-to-end critical risk management framework, if you like. And this is the framework that we apply when we help our clients, which is based on the International Council on Mining and Metals framework, which a lot of people on the line are familiar with. Yep. So if we're thinking about that, then what I've done here, I've just got to move my cursor, move my video, is if I look through the lens of the critical control management requirements as they're defined by the legislation, it's essentially asking us to define your material unwanted events, define your critical controls, update your risk management stuff, and potentially I maybe should have done it, offices of corporations need to know about what you're doing and where it's at. So that's through one lens to look at. What we're now knowing and what we're seeing is to get to those blue boxes, there's some fun foundation activities that need to be performed. And we talked about that before, didn't we? Okay, to get to my list of material unwanted events, I have to define what's material, and it makes sense that I do a broad brush risk assessment. And this, I think, is people maybe are starting to get their head around, is yes, it's the words in the paper, but the supporting activities it goes to get to that level of compliance, there's a bit in there. Or the flip side is people just put words in the paper and say, I'm all good. And then they shouldn't be surprised when stuff goes pear-shaped because they don't have all of these underpinning platforms and elements. So, biggest aha moment. You've still got time. Out of everything we've gone through, and we've gone through a lot, and we've gone through really, really quick, if you could choose one thing that's like, yep, that's the key thing, what would it be from everything we've just gone through? Or it could be an aha moment, it could be an oh shit moment. Something else. I'll give everyone really keen, because it's now just to bring everything together. Just throw in the chat. What's at least one thing here? Joel, we're adopting PHMPs like New South Wales has. Yeah, thanks, Joel. Margot, BBRA using RAP template as a foundation. Yep. Caitlin, yes, materiality criteria is up to us. Yes. 100%. Melanie, same thing. Guy, verification of critical controls effectiveness, which I haven't even unpacked yet. That's obviously an essential bit. Who else has got something to throw in? Christy, redo the BBRA. Yep. Dan, PHMPs and integrating the MUEs into management plans. Yes. Linda, threshold and link to the CMO rep. Yeah, 100%. Craig, we have critical controls listed in procedures, but not linked thoroughly through whole SHMS. Yes, thanks, Craig. Karen, don't miss the rack step between the BBRA and the bow tie. Yeah. All right, and I'll come back to that question to Ahmed. Awesome, thank you. Please keep putting that in too. All right, I won't do 1 to 10 because we've got that and we've just done a bit of a descriptive there of understanding where people are at with where they need to be. So then obviously the next question is, you know, we've all got questions. We know there's some key learnings that people have just shared. What I'm imparting here is, yeah, there's a fair bit of work. And what I do know, having helped a number of clients, is if if your organization rushes or goes the short way to get to compliance, yes, on paper you might be compliant, but we know there's a difference between compliance and effectiveness. And then I'm sure in the same boat as many other people, we're talking about, well, how do I do it? How do I get to this point of being compliant, plus all the other stuff that's going on? And I mentioned at the start, there's at least 3 options on some extra information you can get to get you to that point. And so one of the things we're offering, it's only for the next couple of weeks actually, is a free critical risk management review, where you essentially do what we've done there. You do a self-assessment against the framework, give yourself a rating to understand what are the bits you've been missing, and then we have essentially a 15-minute triage call to go, okay, well, based on where you are, this is what it is. So this is what it looks like, is we've got a form, which I'll put in the chat now. It's already done and set up because we've got it happening with another program where you go through each step of the framework, watch a little video, give yourself self-assessment, then we have a call, and then hopefully through that, you at least have an informed action plan on how you can move forwards with that. So that's one. I'm just going to get the link and put in the chat before I then move on to the next bit. Here it is there. Put this in the chat. Bear with me. My links work. All right, that's in the chat. So hopefully that can get yourself going and move pretty quick on that. And the self-assessment goes a little bit deeper in some of those elements that we've just been going through. And what's the benefits? Well, look, we don't have time of the luxury, so you don't need to take 5 years to go through to get to that point of what's the framework, where I'm at, and what do I need to do. So what I call it, the 40 minutes as opposed to the 5-year journey. And you don't need to pay expensive consultants to come in and tell you that same stuff like myself and a few others, you can just go through that same framework, and then hopefully we can set you up for success, at least knowing where to move forwards on the next bit, what that looks like. So that's one option there for those that not sure where they are or what the next bit is. The second bit for those that just want to do it themselves, it's like you kind of know how to do it. Thanks, Joel. You kind of know how to do it, or you just, look, you don't have a budget to outsource it. You just want the tools and templates you can get forward and go and do it yourself. Then we run a 2-day critical risk management masterclass where we go through that whole framework end to end, and we cover off the edge, the knowledge, what are the templates. We go through case studies, so you try the templates on case studies, and the view is so you can go back to your organization and just get cracking. And we know if you can do that, then you're going to comply with these legislative requirements that are coming. So I'll put the link to that in the chat as well. So I know a few people on the line have been there. I think, KT, you've been in it. And I think I saw Josh before has also been there. And we've got our next one, I think, is at the end of this month in Brisbane. So if you can make it, highly recommend it. Of people, come along. It's 2 days. It's some really good conversations. I always learn lots of stuff. And we're having some really good wins actually with people who've joined it. And the benefit you've got with the pack now, it's been the culmination of our projects and people sharing in these classes. Yeah, I'm really, really happy with it and where it's at. So that's where help is for those that just want to come and learn, take the tools and templates, go off and do it yourself. And then the last one, which I'll keep it really, really brief, is we also have an accelerator program, which is more for people who are on the journey. Like, the skills, you've got the tools and templates, but it's like, oh, I'm not quite sure on a few different bits. Like the analogy I give, if you do the ICMM training, you do the ICMM and you're jazzed up about ICMM for those 2 days, but then it might be 3 months later before you actually go and do your first ICMM. And it's almost like you got to go back and, how do I do this again? What's it like? That's what this accelerator program is for those that have either done the training or they're on their way, or they're kind of confident of how they do it. It's the sounding board of getting access again to the tools and templates. There's a help community, there's fortnightly strategy calls where we just hold your hand along the way. So after this, we'll send you a link, and we're giving everyone, a free month to get in there, so you can see what it's all about. Right. So I thought that would only take 40 minutes, but it's taken 57. I'm happy to stay on the line after the formal end to talk through any questions. The few people had emailed me some questions, which I'm happy to unpack on the line. For those that do need to go, before I come back to the questions, we're going to bundle up the recording, and we'll also get out a link to a copy of the slide pack and the recording as well. So the fact that you've registered or you've been on here, then we'll get you access to that, and we'll give you all the links and things like that. So for those that do need to go, so I want to make sure you're away and get your next meeting. Thank you for joining.